Howdy folks, this is Justin at Metcalf Mills. Just when you thought Thursday couldn't get no better, I'm going to bring you Story Time Tuesday on Thursday. You're welcome and I hope you enjoy it. On today's Story Time Tuesday, I'm going to share some things about my great-great-grandpa, and his name was Joe Hardy Metcalf. And he lived up towards the head of this creek in an old hewed out log house. It was a pretty big log house, and he built it when he was just a young man. He died in 1936. I think he was born in 1856, I believe. So he built this house in 1870, in the mid 1870s. I won't give an exact year, but in the 1870s when he built this log house. And the log house the property there it went down to one of my grandpa's brothers eventually, and he sold the log house, and a crew of men they moved this log house down to Lake Lure, North Carolina. I've been down there to see it before. It's down right next to the water there at Lake Lure. And it's not put up exactly like it was up there. They changed it around a little bit, but it's still there. So that log house he built's about 150 years old now, and them big old logs they hewed out with broad axes are still right there. Right here is a picture of Pap and Grandma. Her name was Elizabeth Hite Metcalf, and his name, like I said, was Joe Hardy Metcalf. And that's her picture, and that picture right there, Aunt Ruby told me that was made about a week before Pap died. So that is close to the end of his life there. And the clothes that they had on in that picture, Grandma there, she made them clothes. She made all their clothes, spun wool and knitted their socks, made their socks and everything. And so that picture right there was in 1936, around a week before Pap died. That's when that was made. And what happened to him? Aunt Ruby told me that he was trimming apple trees, and she said he hit his hand a little bit with that saw he was using to trim apple trees, and she said it just grained his hand a little bit, and he took blood poison that killed him. But he would have been 80 years old at that time, so he was pretty old. And they said the day before he died, one of his sheep died, and he had got a shovel and set the shovel there beside of the door outside of his house. He set that shovel there beside the door. He's planning on burying that sheep the next day. So, and my grandpa's told me things about him. Pa said he kept his boots hanging up outside. I guess he had extra boots and he kept them hanging up outside, I guess on the porch or something. He had a big old hewed out log corn crib. There's a big apple house there. There was a I think I'm pretty sure it was a log spring house. There's a pretty spring up there. It's beautiful. He laid them rocks up there so pretty and got that spring box coming down through there, and it's all made out of pretty rocks. Maybe one day we can take a walk and I'll share that with you up there. He had a little barn there, and let's see, he had a big old log blacksmith shop there where he done his shop work. And he had a big pair of belluses in there that, I guess a double lung bellows that it made the air for his forge to heat metal up and bend it and hammer it out on his anvil like he needed. And I've got something that belonged to him, and I'll share that with you in another video. I think you'll enjoy seeing that. And let's see here. Now right here, this picture is of his log house. See how I've got that nice and plain on there. Right there. You can see when he first built his house, it wasn't that big. They added on to it. And it had an upstairs over here on this side. So it was a pretty big house. And then they added on this little, I think this was a little kitchen room they added on later. But when they added on, I guess they added on this part right here, this side over here, all logs. I'll tell you about that day. Aunt Ruby told me about that. But after Pap died, my grandpa, he stayed there with Grandma a lot and kind of watched after her. My grandpa told me he's got up a many a morning and built a fire in that fireplace to cook, you know, or not to cook, but to warm up. My grandpa, I called him Paul. Paul told me that when Pap and Grandma got married, the first, I don't know how many years, the first years of their marriage, Grandma had to cook on the fireplace. She didn't have no stove or nothing. She cooked 3 meals a day on the fireplace. And Papper, that's another picture of him right there, you can see. He's the one that I've said in some of my videos, he loved fried taters, and he eat fried taters every morning for breakfast. So, I guess that's where I get it from. Aunt Ruby told me that the day that they added on that other part of the house, Pap already had his logs drug out. He drug them out with horses, I guess. He had his logs drug out, and they was, I think from this mountain community here, there was 35 men come that day, and they hewed them logs and put that, added on that room to that house and got it done, pretty much done in a day's time. And she said all the women come with their men, and you know, they cooked and kept everybody fed and everything, and they all worked together and they got that done. And I've always thought about that. She said there's 35 men come and help Pap get that room put on that house. And just an old hewed out mountain log cabin. I wished I could have seen that house, but it was gone before I was around to see it. Which I did go see it down at Lake Lure, but that really ain't like seeing it in, you know, like it was up there at the old home place. And Pap, he was they said that he was a good doctor, a mountain doctor like. He, Aunt Ruby told me a story or two about him and some of his doctoring. there's this one man. He had got some kind of, I don't know if it's typhoid fever. He'd got some kind of bad fever, and the doctor had been working with him, trying to get him better, and he never could. And Pap went to see him, and they told Pap, they said, if there's anything you know to do for him, do it, because he's a goner. The doctor says there ain't nothing else they can do for him. And that was cold in the winter time, and they said Pap went outside and got a bucket of ice cold water. And he brought that bucket of water in the house, and she said he poured that bucket of ice cold water all over that man and him in the bed, just covered him with that ice cold water. And she said it broke that fever, and he lived a few years after that. So, and I guess if you watch my videos, you remember Aunt Ruby, which is his daughter. She's the one that saved Daddy when he was born, when he was stillborn, and the doctor give up on him. And that's Aunt Ruby. That was Pap's daughter. So, people back in, they just done whatever they thought to do, and they was smart, and they knowed a lot of stuff, and they didn't give up easy, and they had a lot of old-timey wisdom about them. And there's another man one time, he cut his leg with an axe, and the doctor was off somewhere doctoring somebody else and couldn't get to him, and he asked Pap if he could help him with his leg, and Pap took a needle and some kind of, I guess, I don't know if he used a hair out of a horsetail or a thread or what, but he took a needle and thread and he stitched that man's leg back together where he had cut it open with that axe. And it was a few days after that when the doctor got back, wherever he was gone to. And they said the doctor said he couldn't have done a better job stitching that man's leg up himself. So, that's another time when he doctored and helped somebody. And they said he had a little buggy, and he'd hook his horse to it, and him and Grandma would go places. I think they said he'd take her over to Rims Creek, which that's over in Buncombe County. It'd be a pretty good trip, probably take about all day with a horse and buggy. They said he'd take her over there to see her people over there, Grandma's people, and that little horse and buggy. And I may have told you this story, before, but I'll tell you again a story about him. He had that old log corn crib, and he got the missing corn back on the back end of his crib down there. It's got a door on one end where you get the corn out, and he said the corn was going down back there at the back side. And he thought there's some kind of varmint getting in there and getting his corn, of a night or something. So he got him a steel trap, and he put that steel trap down in there where that corn was getting gone, set it, and tied it off to something there, I guess. And he went to bed that night, and the next morning when he got up, and Aunt Ruby said the first thing he'd do is go outside and look around at everything, check on his animals and feed them and stuff. And she said he come out the door there and looked down there at his corn crib and said there's a man hanging on the side of his corn crib down there. Had his arm run in between them logs, reaching down in there. And that man had got his hand in that steel trap, and it closed up on his hand, and he couldn't get his other hand in there to get loose, and he had to just hang there. whatever time he went, late at night, he had to hang there all night. If it was early in the morning, he'd been there a little while too. So he was the one that was getting Pap's corn out of his crib, stealing it. And Aunt Ruby said Pap went down there and got his hand out of that steel trap. And she said Pap made him come back up to the house and come in there and sit down at the table and eat breakfast with them. And Aunt Ruby said the whole time that man was there at the table, he just sat there with his head down. He wouldn't look at none of them. He is so ashamed of himself. And Aunt Ruby said when they got done eating, I think Pap got him some corn out of his crib and give it to him and said, if you ever need anything else, you come and ask me for it. So that shows a lot about how he was, you know. A lot of people wouldn't have done that, but to me, you couldn't have done nothing no better for that man. And that story's always meant a lot to me, and it means a lot about how to treat other people, because in one way or another, that man had his own circumstances, and he thought he had to steal to make it, and maybe he did, but Pap straightened him out that day about stealing from him, and if he's needing anything, you know, to ask him for it. So that's a story that I'll always cherish that I got to hear. And that story is probably, it's over 100 years old, I know, because Aunt Ruby was still at home, so that was probably in the teens or something when that happened. And Aunt Ruby said that they had a little Jenny, and if you don't know, that's a little donkey. And she said her and Grandma, and I don't know who else was there by themselves one night. Pap would go off hunting, and he'd stay gone a week hunting and bring back meat, you know, for them to eat. And that's how he put meat on the table, was he hunted. And she said they was there one night by themselves, and they heard them old doors, the way they done them old door latches. They had a latch on the inside that the latch would go down behind a catch to hold the door shut. And the way that worked, they had a string tied on the top of that latch, and it went up, and they had a hole through the door there, and that string went outside, and if you wanted to come in, you just pull that string, and it'd lift that latch up, and you could open the door. And of a night, if they wanted to, they'd just pull that string back through the hole, and nobody couldn't get in, because it was locked from the inside, and there wasn't no way to raise that latch. And she said one night they heard that latch raise. They had forgot to pull the string in, and they heard that latch raise up, and the door come open. And she said they heard little footsteps, you know, coming through the kitchen there. And I think they was upstairs. She said they eased over there real quiet and easy and eased down the stairs, and they was looking into the kitchen over there. And she said that little Jenny, that little donkey, had come in the door, pulled that string and come in the door and went over in the kitchen, and it was eating on a biscuit or something over there in the kitchen when they come down there. So that's a good little story she told me. And they said Pap had a horse. It's a mule. He had a mule one time. And the thing is bad to bite you. And they said one time he was standing there, and that old mule turned around and bit him on the back. And they said he just reached up and got that mule's ear and put it in his mouth, and he bit down on that mule's ear with his teeth. bit the far out of that mule's ear, and they said that mule never did bite nobody else after that. So that was a funny story too. And when he built his old log house up there, they had to clear land, and you can go up in there, and on the sides of the hills up in there, there's big old rock piles where they piled rocks out of their field and growed corn to live on, and wheat, and they had a big garden and everything up there, and that was really tough living, but they didn't know no better, and I guess to them it was the best thing in the world, you know, to live back up in the holler and live off of the land, and they didn't know no better. And there in 29, when they had that big depression, they said the people back up in these mountains, they really didn't know nothing about it. The only problems it caused them was they had a little trouble getting salt, and they had trouble getting coffee and sugar, I think, was the only problems that they really had out of the depression. And I remember Aunt Ruby talking about Pap having to go way off somewhere to get salt to cure their meat with and stuff. It was hard to get. And she said he had to go off somewhere and get their salt. But other than that, I mean, they raised about everything they eat, and they hunted, and they didn't depend on nothing outside of their self and their community. They helped each other. And Aunt Ruby said she remembered the first fertilizer they got. She said it smelled like fish, and they measured it out. I believe it was a teaspoon. They'd go through and put a teaspoon to every hill, whatever they was growing, a hill of corn or a hill of beans, they'd put a teaspoon. But back in, people cleared new grounds. They'd clear, in the wintertime, they'd work and clear off a new ground, just where it was growed up, maybe in timber. They'd clear that off and grub out the stumps and the scrub and all that, clean it off, and they'd farm that, and it was rich ground. It had been wood, you know, so it's got that topsoil and that dark, rich dirt in the woods. That's what they'd farm, and that next year, after they cleared a new ground, they could grow all kinds of stuff in there because the ground was so rich. And that's how they done that. They'd clear off a new ground, and I guess when the ground got to where it wasn't a producing, I don't know how many, I've heard people talk about how many years, it might be like 3 years they'd grow a new ground without any fertilizer. I guess after that they'd just maybe fence it in and use it for pasture or something, but that's how they survived in these mountains. And you know, hewing old log house out, no nothing, to split out oak boards or shingles to roof it with and keep the rain out, and made their own beds and lived in an old log house, no insulation, a fireplace or two in there is all they had for heat, and that's how they lived. And they said when Pap died, they got an embalmer to come and embalmed him up there, and I remember Daddy talking about that. They said when they embalmed him, you know, they take your blood out and put that chemical in, and they said they poured his blood in the creek out there. So the creek runs right down here by our house. And yeah, they poured his blood in the creek, and Aunt Ruby said they hauled him from up there at his house down across the gap over to the cemetery on the other creek on a sled. behind horses. Horses in the sled is how they hauled him over at the cemetery. Aunt Ruby, I used to go up and visit with her, and I'd get her wood in sometimes and anything else that I could help her do. She had a lot of family up there around that helped her, but I'm just glad they let me help a little bit and do a little something for her, because I thought the world of her. She was real old when I was able to get to know her, and it's just a pleasure to get to know her and be able to do a little thing or two for her once in a while. And she's the one that saved Daddy's life, and I guess she got that kind of ambition from her daddy, I guess, because he's always helping people and doctoring and stuff, and I guess that just naturally come down to her, and I was really thankful for her, and Daddy was too. But Pap, I guess he's partly responsible for that too, the way he was helping people. He just kind of passed that down, I guess, to Aunt Ruby and maybe some more of his children that I didn't get to know. But he was Pap's boy was my great-grandpa, and sometime I can tell you some stories about him and show you some pictures too. And well, this is Justin at Metcalf Mills. I hate Storytime Tuesday was late. I've had some important things that I've had to tend to this week, and it was kind of a little bit of an emergency, kinda, and everything's okay now, and we'll just keep it going. And like I say, I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm glad I got here. This is Justin at Metcalf Mills. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, hit like, subscribe to my channel. I'll bring you some more of these good old-timey mountain stories. I'll bring them to you. I look forward to seeing you next time.